Here.
Next year, he said he only gave like a couple of hundred.
He gave
bucks.
180.
Yeah, 180.
I actually made this business card for them.
And what's his name? Said they were donating like 1,800.
Who, Mishulam?
Yeah.
Well,
Did you get anything from him yet?
they haven't yet, but, you know. But we've donated a lot to them. Okay. Yeah.
It's on the speakers. I don't know.
What, Mushka?
Yeah.
Let me just do it once and for all.
What?
Let me do it once and for all.
Okay. And also, I have to reprint the phone
Okay. Oh, man.
Yeah, it was hard getting up at 1 o'clock in the morning and showing up. Did you go at midnight and start with them?
Yeah, but there was just me and Moti. It went pretty quickly.
It took about 45 minutes, 50
What?
minutes for the services. Did you do Salih one also?
I'm sorry?
Did you do the services also after the Fabrengen?
We did Slichos. Is
Yeah.
that what you-
And did you sit around and talk like the Fabrengen?
We did.
And we've been getting minions on Shabbos?
Yes. Yeah, we had a nice minion on Shabbos.
Yeah, I look forward. It's gonna be it's gonna be a little longer Shabbos this week. Are the services Friday night or do they start, Friday night?
Rosh Hashanah starts Friday
Friday
night.
night, okay. And the dinner is Friday night or?
I think so. I don't know the whole schedule off my
Yeah, me neither.
top of my head. So let's see, the schedule is this way.
I fixed it. It wasn't plugged in. If it's not plugged in, the battery dies. Okay, let's get started right away.
I gotta get out of here right away, but.
All right, well, we'll see you, Mark.
I'll see, I'm all set. I got the instructions for Rosh Hashanah. I don't think. we
Great,
need
it
to
should be
talk.
the same.
Yeah, everything should be good. I know there's Shabbos or whatever the Shabbos.
So we add in Shabbos things
Yeah.
and we take out all the shofar stuff.
Right.
So that's
Okay.
first day, and then the second day is regular.
Friday night is.
Friday night is Shabbos,
I know.
and it's
What
basically
time?
the same. Oh, Friday, what time to start? You know, I put 6:30. We'll start davening 6:30, but I realized that we have to light candles at 6:19. That's just technicality.
Okay.
So 6:30, 6:20.
And the
Yeah,
dinner is Friday
Seven.
night
Friday night, probably whenever we finish. You know,
here?
yeah, I'm gonna do it outdoors there.
Oh, cool.
The
It's gonna be cool.
The distillery's out of commission. They're trying to sell.
Oh, bummer.
$1.2 million.
So are you gonna have coverings or?
Outdoors. If it rains, I'll have to move it here. I'll have a tent here. If it doesn't rain, then I'll do it outdoors there.
Okay, yeah, it's gonna be it'll get chilly.
You
But
know,
not too bad.
It shouldn't be too bad
Be
when,
like
as long as
around
we're,
60.
yeah, well, as long as we're doing it. We did something yesterday. We did a program yesterday, and you know, yesterday actually it started raining at the end, but then it stopped raining, and yeah, we did a kids thing.
Guys, have a great day.
You too. Okay, let's
Good to
get
see you,
started.
Mark.
Good to see you.
Okay, so someone went outside of the city on Erev Shabbos, and he left food outside the city in the Tchum. Okay, so Tchum Shabbos is a very strict law, which nowadays we usually only, I mean, it is relevant, but you usually find it when you are like staying in a vacation home, like you get a cabin. So Tchum Shabbos means 2,000 amas, which is 3,000 feet outside a residence. You're not allowed to walk out. And some say it's biblical. You're not allowed to walk out of that. So like actually, a lot of people go to the country on the East Coast. Some people here have cabins kind of out in the woods. And it's important to know that if you go on a walk and you like to hike on Shabbos, there's a certain point that is absolutely forbidden to pass.
Wow.
Okay, so this guy here, what he did is on Friday, he went outside of the city and he put food far from the city but inside the Tchum. And he set up his place of rest there. Even though he's going to return to the city and go into his house, it is considered that he set his place to stay in the area where he ate. And that is called eiruvin tchumin. So, on Shabbos, everyone's talking about Shabbos a lot. All the rabbis talking about their sermons because, it's just an interesting thing that this year, the Rebbe always commented that this year is called the Shabbos Dikiyar. It's called the Shabbos year because Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. And Rosh Hashanah is like the head of the year, falls out on Shabbos. It's interesting. We see how the rabbis were so vigilant about Shabbos that they're even willing to cancel shofar. With shofar, it's so meaningful. It's such a meaningful moment for everybody. The rabbis canceled it because they're worried that you'll break Shabbos. And so it's just interesting. Everyone's been talking about Shabbos a lot. Everyone's talking about, some rabbis are saying, well, there's all these spiritual concepts on Shabbos. That's what the Rebbe spoke about. Some rabbis said it's sad that in a lot of people's mind, the default is people don't keep Shabbos anymore. It's not so important to keep Shabbos, But anyways, so here it's interesting. This is a concept called setting up your shvisa, setting up your place of rest. And the eruv, the food there, is called the eiruvin tchumin. Now, from the place that you set up before Shabbos, you can now, so tchum means the boundary that of 2,000 amos, 2,000 cubits, which is 3,000 feet. That's what tchum means. When you set up your place of food there, you can go 2,000 amos from there.
From there.
So you can extend it. So that's called eiruvin tchumin. And therefore, when you're going from the place of your eruv the next day, 2,000 amos, you don't go into the Medina until the end of its midah. And if it is inside, then you can consider the city area like 4 amos, and you can fill its measurement outside of it. Okay, so the Ram is going to explain. Ketzad. For example, you put your eruv 2,000 amos from your house in the city on the east side. Comes out the next day, you can go east. So, okay, here's the city. This is the east side, right? This is the east side, just to make it. You put 2,000 amos here, you put food there, and you set up. So now you can go 2,000 amos east, right?
From where the food is.
Yeah. So, and you can go from the place of your eruv, you can go 2,000 amos west, the 1,000 from the eruv until your house, and 1,000 from your house inside the city. But you can only, that is your tchum. If there is from your house until the end of the city less than 1,000 amos, even 1 amma less, comes out that your 2,000 amos from your food, from your house, is inside the city, then you can consider the whole area 4 amos, like 4 amos, and you can go outside the city 996 amos to include 2,000. Okay, so what you basically did is you extended the tchum in one direction, so you can go east 2,000 amos from there. Then you have from that point till your house, and then you can calculate 1,000 amos from your house the other directions. But if that's the end of the city, so then you can count the city like 4 amos. In other words, the city is all your area, and then outside your area you can go 1,996, because 1,996 plus 4.
So you can walk from the place of rest back to your house.
Yes, yeah, and further, and on the other side. Therefore, if you put the eruv of 2,000 amos from your house, then you lose the whole city. Comes out, you're going from your house until your eruv 2,000 amos, and from your eruv 2,000 until your house, and you can't go from your house in the Medina to west even 1 amma. So where you have basically your 2 places of rest, and they calculate where your 2,000 amos are going to be for Shabbos. Now this is all learned out from basically, if you're in the desert and you set up a tent, so then it's very simple. You can only go 2,000 amos in all directions of your tent.
That's a radius then.
Yes. But, so here what we're doing is you're extending, when you extend your tchum, you do lose out on the other side, unless certain circumstances, unless there's less than, and now these are all rabbinic decrees in order, most of the things on Shabbos, I mean, it is quite incredible how vigilant the rabbis are to preserve Shabbos.
No kidding.
And it is, yeah. So if you leave your eruv, in the private domain, even if it's a big city like Nineveh, and even if it's a destroyed city, or it's a cave which you can live in, you can go 2,000 amos outside of that thing the whole way. So if you are creating a techum, but you're not creating Rosh Hashanah, so you're putting a picnic bench, in bloody basin, right? So then you're extending 2,000 amos in each direction, right? However, if you're putting the eruv in a private domain, so then even if it's a big city, you can go 2,000 amos outside of the city. Now, let's say you say like this, okay, if you leave your eruv inside the city that you're resting, you didn't really do anything, and you only, you don't measure from your eruv. So if you're in a park, you don't measure 2,000 eruv, you measure from outside the city. And then, therefore, let's say there's an area outside the city, and you put your eruv there also. You can measure outside the... So what's interesting is it's interesting. So, I mean, talk about Shabbos last year, whenever my bracha has a baby, there's always the question of if the baby is born on Shabbos, how do you get to the hospital? So you can drive to the hospital. But the thing is you can't really walk, you can't drive back, right? So you have to walk back. Now, if you walk back, now this hospital here, even though it's much more than 3,000 amos, maybe 8 miles, nevertheless, there is no area of 3,000 cubits where there's no city life, right? The houses don't end all the way to the hospital within that amount of space. But let's say you're going to Mayer, Arizona, you want to walk to Mayer, whatever it is, from Prescott Valley, then likely, halachically, you cannot walk out of that. At a certain point, there may be an area with no homes. I'm not even sure. I never fully cared to measure.
The 2,000 amos holds outside the city.
Yes, correct.
Where there's no habitation.
Correct. So,
So
here...
you can always walk within the city.
Yeah, correct. So, like, let's say you want to walk to Skull Valley or something like that. Could be at a certain point you can't walk anymore. And you can live at the border. But at a certain point you can't walk anymore. On the other hand, so that's, so in New York, people walk. Actually, it's a beautiful thing. On the holidays, on the end of every holiday, all the Hasidim and the Rebbe started this. They walk to shuls around New York. And, Manhattan's about 6 miles. But again, when you walk to Manhattan, you're pretty much walking through a city. You're walking over a bridge, through city, walking over a bridge, and then more city. It's not, there's no area. Here, Prescott, if you would live, let's say, in Cordes Junction, so there would be a certain point, or if you live in Arco Santi, at a certain point, you can't walk anymore if you want to walk out of there. Okay.
Or where Corone lives.
Corona, so that is even questionable. There are houses all over the place there, but there is a house on the edge somewhere there, and that house on the edge, at some point somewhere there's a house on the edge in Arizona. I don't know where the houses end. It could be the end miles and miles. The streets go very far, but potentially you have this concept. Okay, you do not do an eruv techumin except for the purpose of a mitzvah. This is a very interesting law. You don't do an eruv techumin except for the purpose of a mitzvah. For example, let's say you want to visit someone who's mourning, or you want to go to a wedding party on Saturday night, or you want to greet your teacher, or your friends coming, or because you're worried that you have to run away from the Gentiles or pogroms or whatever it is. But if you don't do these things, nevertheless it's considered an error, but you're not supposed to set up the situation unless you're doing it for the purpose of a mitzvah. So let's say, you need to give money to somebody right after Shabbos for a certain purpose of a mitzvah, so you go and you can set up your shop there or whatever, or you need to be available. Or let's say a very simple example. I mean, it's interesting. Let's say you need to travel to the airport for a mitzvah. And so you set up your place. So right after Shabbos, you're the closest, your car's ready to go and you're ready to go to the airport. So, okay.
So is it saying that it can't be a means to an end unless The end is a
Well, it's
mitzvah.
saying that the rabbis gave this thing in order to do a mitzvah. If you're doing it not for mitzvah, you didn't sin, you're following Jewish law. But ideally, the purpose is for a mitzvah.
Okay. Understood.
Okay, anybody, kol shemishtatzen bay. Anyone who's involved in this, you can do an eruv. Anyone who wants to partner in it can partner in this eruv techumen, and anyone does, they cannot follow it. And what is the shiur? How much food do you need to make eruv techumen? It is the amount of 2 meals for each person, and if it is a dip, it's in order to eat 2 meals. Okay, so you need the eruv. It has to be in one place that you can eat it, and it has to be at the point that you can eat it at Bein Hashmashis. Bein Hashmashis is twilight. Therefore, if you're going to sleep in the public domain, and you have an eruv in the Rishus HaYachid, you have an eruv in the private domain, or in a private domain and you have the eruv in the public domain, it's not an eruv. You cannot take out from the private to the public at Bein Hashmashis except with an avera. So it has to be in the place you're making an eruv at the time the sun. So let's say you didn't bring it yet. So it's now another example where this might be common. It has gotten very popular in the East Coast to go camping on Shabbos. Go camping on Shabbos, young people. So it's a lot of halachas are involved. Even the Jewish people who are like very modern, a lot of halachas are involved. So they needed to set up things like this so they can set up their camps and have a nice Shabbos meal and
Before Shabbos.
before Shabbos, yeah.
So they go out to their campsite before Shabbos?
They go out before. Yeah, twilight is, we're not exactly sure exact point Shabbos starts. But that's why we take Shabbos at sunset at the beginning of Shabbos, and we end Shabbos at 3 stars, because twilight, we're not exactly sure when the moment Shabbos starts is. Okay. All right. However, if you're going to stay in a private domain or in a public domain, and you leave the eruv in a intermediate domain, Carmelis, or you want to stay in the Carmelis and you leave the eruv in the private domain or in the public domain, this is an eruv, because when you do the eruv, at the time when the eruv starts working at Bein Hashmashis, you can technically bring to the Carmelis for a mitzvah, because anything that's for the rabbis, anything that's going to be a mitzvah, the rabbi said you don't do. Okay, so. The rule is you're not allowed to do any work at Bein Hashmashis as soon as the sunset. However, if it's for a mitzvah during Bein Hashmashis until nightfall, the rabbi said there's certain, if you're not going against a malacha, you're allowed to do something according to Bein at that time. So I'll give you an example. Oh God, it's a tough example, but let's say a Gentile is not allowed to do work for you on Shabbos, according to the rabbis, right? So now, let's say the Gentiles are going to do something for the purpose of a mitzvah, right? So you can get them to do it at Bein Hashmashis, because the reason why a Gentile can't do it is because because the rabbis don't allow it. And Bein Hashmashis is not necessarily fully Shabbos. It's doubtful if it's Shabbos yet. So therefore, you can get the rabbis to do something at Bein Hashmashis. You can get something done at Bein Hashmashis.
So, like for a wedding on Saturday night?
The wedding on Saturday night is tough because you could just push off the wedding. But let's say
Till later.
Let's say you're not going to have a chauffeur, right? Unless a Gentile brings it. So you can't bring the chauffeur. You're not going to have the chauffeur for Sunday. Well, Sunday you could bring it. But let's say you picked up a chauffeur and you're driving back, right? So now you're driving back. Once it's nightfall, you have to stop your car. So maybe you'll get stuck and you can't make it. Maybe there won't be a chauffeur. But if during Bein Hashmashis, you can give it to a Gentile to bring it. So those are, now, chauffeur is actually a whole subject. It's interesting because there's sometimes, if your chauffeur is stuck somewhere, you just can't blow the chauffeur,
Right.
That's the way it is. Okay,
Wow.
let's do one more.
Super tough and complicated.
Yeah. Now, let's say you locked up the eruv in a locker, whatever. Here it says a tower, but and you lost the key. If you're able to take it out without doing work, then it's eruv. Because, however, if it's somewhere that a tree or something like that you can't climb up in, then if you put it at the top of a branch or something that's growing, it's not an eruv because you're not allowed to climb up, right? So even you don't have to have the eruv in the place, but if you're able to bring it at the time of Bein Hashmashes, at the time of twilight, you're able to bring it without breaking the law, then you're allowed to do it. However, if it's at the top of a post, then and you just technicality, you need someone to climb up, then is considered eruv. Anyone who puts an eruv, he has in the place of his eruv 4 amas, and therefore, if you put an eruv not at the end of the tchum and it rolls and it goes outside of the tchum within 2 amas, it's an eruv, as if it didn't go out of its place. However, if it goes outside of 2, it's not an eruv because it's now outside of the tchum. And if you put the eruv outside the tchum, it's not eruv because you're not able to get to it. So if you put it at the end of 3,000 feet, and the rabbis were quite strict about it, if you put it outside 3,000 feet, it is not considered an eruv. Okay, unless it's within 2 amas. Okay, so let's go. We're going to study Tanya. We finished chapter 33. Chapter 33 is a very worthwhile chapter, but we finished it. Definitely an important chapter, but chapter 34 is a continuation of it. Chapter 33 says, it starts off, it says, if you want to become happy and free yourself up, you have to meditate, and you have to go in depth into 2 meditations in particular, but into meditations that basically show that God is everything. And if God is everything, nothing can anger you, nothing can bother you. God is always with you in every situation. And that's what we said at Habakkuk. The prophet said, the main mitzvah is belief in God, because if you believe in God and you know God is everything, then you'll do all the mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are difficult when we have entitlement to ourselves. When we don't have entitlement because we know that we totally belong to God, and we think about this, then first of all, nothing can really hurt us. Nothing's outside of God's hands. Nothing can make us struggle. Whenever we get hurt, we realize it's just God's plan, and God is, taking us to fulfill our purpose, and therefore we'll be able to do all the mitzvahs. And that's what we finished. And we said that struggle, and we'll know that when we struggle with things, that also is just bringing out the faith in us and revealing to us that God is everything. And there's no greater joy than transformation for God. And we realize that everything in our life we're doing because God is everywhere, and He's aware of everything. He's aware of every problem. Because we know that, then we know every challenge is God-tailored and God-given. And when we transform those challenges, we know that we're giving God the greatest gift. And that's what we finished off in the end of page chapter 3. And that's the great joy that we have in God, that we know that everything that we have is created by God in that situation. It's fully absorbed with God, and there's nothing which is outside of that circle. And therefore, our life and our struggles are all just to transform. And we said that the meditation, the knowledge of knowing that everything is God's, first of all, helps us do the mitzvahs. And second of all, besides helping us do the mitzvahs, it also awakens, just that knowledge transforms the world, and it helps us do the mitzvahs, and we fully transform the world. And we said when we do that, first of all, we're happy because we know God is with us, like the King is always with us. And God is happy also because we bring the consciousness of Him to the world, and we elevate the world, and that's what He is looking for. We elevate ourselves in the world. Okay, so now we're going to continue, and we're going to talk more about how this knowledge of God being everything is, and we brought 2 parables where the Alter Rebbe says you have to yamik b'machshavta, you have to go in depth in your thoughts, v'yitzar b'sichlei, and you have to have clear imagery in your intellect. So in other words, it has to be very, very clear. And generally speaking, in Judaism, when you make things default in your mind, or when you make things obvious, when you think about something a lot, it becomes obvious. And when it becomes obvious, then it starts to transform you. Until it becomes obvious, it doesn't. Okay. So, v'hine medazeh shavas hine merkava. Now, knowing this, the forefathers are called the Merkava. Merkava means a wagon. What does it mean that they were a wagon? Who were they a wagon to? They were a chariot to God. They were a chariot. Now, what is a comparison of a chariot? Shekol yemeim lo'ilam lehifsiku afilu sha'achas melakasher dayit neshmesan l'bayna alam b'bitol hanal yichudi yizbarach. chariot or wagon, it is something which is totally 100% run by the driver. It has no choice. It has takes no direction. It's from itself. So the forefathers, this is what the Alter Rebbe says. The Alter Rebbe says, all their days, they did not stop even for one moment from connecting their das, their mind, and their soul to the master of the universe, to the oneness of God. So they were always totally conscious that God is everything. And they were always following God. Interesting, okay, so, B'achareim kol neviim kol echad lefi madrigas nishmas v'asagase. Not only were the forefathers like that, but all the prophets were as well, in their own level. As we know, prophets, the Rambam goes through all the necessities for a prophet to be able to receive God's word. Prophets don't speak for themselves. God leads from this, and this is only possible if you have no identity to yourself. And who was the highest prophet? Who had the least identity? Moses. Moses had the least self-identity. And that's why Moses was the most humble, because he just had no identity. He knew what he needed to do. He knew his purpose. He knew what he needed to do was important, but he had no importance to himself. It was all God's importance. Sha'amra alav, and this is what it says, Shechina medaberes mitoch goyna shel Moshe. It says the Shechina literally spoke from within his throat. So Moses, he didn't even speak. There was no identity mixed in it. It was Moses speaking to him. And there's we know that there's several differences between Moses and other prophets. They're all connected to this idea, although the prophets had to go to sleep. Because when they were awake, their conscious identity was a blockage from their prophecies. Moses could be awake. Moses could be awake and talk to God whenever he wants, because he had no self-identity which separated him from God. He felt zero importance to himself outside of being a creation from God. And somewhat, to a certain extent, the Jewish people merited this when they were standing at Sinai. So when they heard God's word while they were awake at Sinai, interesting, we mentioned this yesterday, Abe mentioned this yesterday, they were not able to take it. So they heard God's voice, and that was the absolute experience of realizing that their whole identity was not their own. They have no identity. We have no sense of entitlement. It's all God. However, they weren't able to take it. And as the rabbis say, on every word that God said, Paruchu nishmasan, they're is this the one you wore yesterday? Yes, okay. Paruchu nishmasan, their souls left their body, because it's impossible for us to totally take away our identity. Because it's impossible for us to totally take away our identity, therefore their bodies died. Their bodies said, we can't take this. This is too much light, and the vessel cracked. And so what did God do? So God brought them back to life, obviously. He brought them back to life, and they said, we want to hear it from Moses. Because Moses was a conduit, and the conduit lessened the extreme energy emanating from God, realizing that everything in the world comes from him. Once they felt that everything is God, they felt, okay, well, we don't want to be ourselves anymore. We don't want to be human anymore. That's what they felt. They couldn't be human. So what did God do? Right afterwards, he gave them the mitzvah of the Mishkan. And in the Mishkan was the Holy of Holies. And that is the place where you can see absolute oneness of God in physical manifestation. So God gave it to them through a tabernacle. And in the tabernacle, he gave them the Holy of Holies. Even though the Shekhinah is in every place in the world, but in the Holy of Holies it's revealed. And through that, he put his total absolute oneness in the tabernacle. And so what was one of the notable things in the tabernacle? Notable things in the tabernacle is if you would measure the ark with its poles, they would be 2.5 amos bigger than the space in the tabernacle. So the Makim Ha'arin, the place that the ark was actually not measured. Now, if you would go and see that, that's like an absolute paradox. because it wasn't like a miracle like splitting of the sea that broke nature. It was actually constant and steady. However, if you measure it, it just simply did not make sense. It didn't add up, literally, mathematically. It didn't add up. So that was God showing absolute oneness. He was showing that the identity of mathematics and the identity of space and time isn't really meaningful. It has no, it doesn't have its actual dignity. It doesn't have it's not really a thing for God. It's just created by God. So that was God's oneness. Now that was one of the revelations in the tabernacle. We just read in the Talmud last Thursday how Rabbi Shmuel and Elisha, the Kohen Gadol, went into the tabernacle on Yom Kippur, and he saw an imagery of God sitting on the throne. So obviously there were all these different revelations in there. But for a regular human who cannot see angels and spiritual things, the minimal you would see is that it doesn't add up. And that shows that the structure of time and space isn't really a real thing. It's just a godly manifestation. All right, now, that was in the times of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, in the first temple in Jerusalem, the Holy of Holies had the Ark in it. In the second temple, there was nothing significant of the Holy of Holies. If you would go inside and you couldn't see spiritual things. Now, we know that the Ark was hidden in another room, which was also holy, but that was hidden in the times of the final king of Yechaniah, the final king of the first temple, or the second to last king of the first temple, who was exiled to Babylonia. He put it in there. When the temple was destroyed, where is God's presence? There is no place for God, except in the 4 amos. This is a terminology. The 4 amos is the space of Jewish law. Torah study is where God is revealed. This is God's will. Torah is the revelation of the godly oneness. And when you study Torah, what happens is Torah, on one hand, is intellect. So it's intellect, so we can ask questions, and we follow certain rules of intellect. The Torah's rules of intellect, albeit. On the other hand, it's God's oneness. So that can create in our minds a sanctuary of God's oneness. The Dalet Amos of Halacha, the 4 cubits of Halacha, that can create in our mind the oneness of Hashem. That's where the Holy of Holies is. So now, V'lachin, because the 4 amos of the 4 cubits of Halacha is where God's presence is nowadays, when we think about the nullification of the world, as we explained before, kifi yecholtai, according to our ability, this is what we will resonate in our hearts. Because our minds are so finite and so limited, and we can't even really understand always the truth of Torah. And on the other hand, a lot of times when we understand something really inspirational, we find out it's not even Torah. V'sharish nishmasi, and the origin, that's because the origin of my soul, not a lofty soul, mihalchil, from containing lias merkava umishkan nechudis baruch, my soul and my mind kind of stops me from being a complete chariot like Moses and the forefathers, because that's the way God created us, and a true mishkan, true tabernacle to oneness of God, be'emes la'amitai, in the truest form, mi'achar delis machshava delay tfisa masagas beis baruch klal, because anyways, minds can't really contemplate and understand God. So therefore, in order to be able to understand God to the extent that it will go and resonate in, here, you can come in, Myrna. Myrna, we'll be done in a couple minutes. You can come in. In order to understand God to a point where it will transform us, we do not have the capability of doing it to the extent of our forefathers and to the extent of our forefathers and to the extent of Moses and all the great prophets. So nevertheless, we should still remember, and as just like the Jewish people, we were not able to take it at the time of the Har Sinai. And it's interesting because the Jewish people say, Moses, we want to hear you. And Moses says, why? Don't you want to hear it directly from God? In other words, Moses thought it's obvious that you should be able to take it from God. Nevertheless, the rabbis tell us that we should study Torah and do it according to our time, set time, morning and night. As in the laws of Talmud Torah, it says different people have a different requirement what to study. As the rabbis say, even one chapter in the morning and one chapter in the night. And for that, you should have gratitude that you're able to invite the divine presence into your life and into your mind twice a day. So in this chapter, there's two things. You should be happy with what you have, but at the same time, realize that you don't really have it. That's part of it, is realize you don't really have it. It's not your fault that you don't have it, but it's your problem. It's not your fault, but it's your life. And that's the situation that God created for you. All right, we'll stop here. Thank you. Thank you. All right. We'll see you tomorrow, I guess. So, there's a lot of nuances in the calendar. You got a calendar yet, Myrna? A lot of I forgot to put a Roy's Yahrzeit in. But this year I started new, so I sent out an email, but I just didn't have the date. But I'll put it in for next year.
Okay.
Yeah. And you should write it in yours. Do you remember what date it is?
January 19th.
I have it written in the computer system. I do have it, just I didn't have all of them. I forgot a lot of them. But I needed to get this out before the high holidays. A lot of nuances here. Like, for example, I replaced the picture of, there's usually like a picture that comes that like someone made a standard graphic. So I